Okay, so Peter, let's start with the basics. Go back to the weekend, because now there are protests in cities across the country, but it all started in LA on Saturday, Australian time. What happened?
It started with some routine federal sweeps to pick up illegal immigrants for deportation from the US. And nobody can argue that Trump does not have a mandate for that. It was one of his core promises that he would conduct, quote, the biggest mass deportation in US history.
The Republican platform promises to launch the largest deportation operation in the history of our country.
The quibble here is the manner in which he executes the law and carries out his campaign promise. In that week, they detained something like 100 people. So it's fairly small scale, really, if you think about the size of that city and the number of illegal immigrants in the US, which is estimated at between 11 and 20 million. It's a pretty small scale. There were some protests against the grabbing, the detaining of some of these people. They were scattered across the city, at least 3 different locations, but from what we've read and seen, the largest of them contained maybe only at most a few hundred protesters. Was there violence? Well, there were some rocks thrown, but this was nothing of a scale that the local police can't handle. This is why local police forces exist. What scaled them up, the protests, was what the state governor, Gavin Newsom, has called the provocation of sending in 2,000 National Guards, and just the announcement that Trump was sending 2,000 National Guards to Los Angeles without the agreement or consent of Gavin Newsom.
Extraordinary images out of Los Angeles tonight. Hundreds of National Guard troops now on the ground, deployed by President Trump, even though state leaders say they didn't ask for them and don't want them there. You see members of—
Okay, well, let's get into California Governor Gavin Newsom just for a moment, because when Trump was asked if he would order the arrest of California officials who tried to interfere with the immigrant roundup, Trump replied, "Officials who stand in the way of law and order, yeah, they'll face judges." And Gavin Newsom responded, "Arrest me. Let's go."
The fear, the horror, the hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. I don't give a damn. But I care about my community. I care about this community. The hell are they doing?
So, okay, there's the escalation. Tell us how much this has escalated. Like, what happened once Trump decided when he said, "I'm going to call in the National Guard"?
Well, for background, he's always portrayed California as an enemy state because it's Democrat stronghold. He's always been insulting, disdainful and aggressive towards Newsom, the governor. He very charmingly nicknames him Gavin Newsome and uses that in all his communications with when he talks about Newsom. So this is a political war pitting the Republican president against the Democrat governor and the Democrat mayor, Karen Bass, who's also an elected Democrat. So that's the political complexion. That's why this is starting in a Democrat state, not in a Republican-controlled state. How it's escalated? Well, you have that threat from Trump that we will arrest anybody who tries to interfere. But he's also said that he wouldn't arrest Newsom because he said he would enjoy the publicity, and I don't want to give him more publicity.
Of course. And it really has escalated, right? I mean, we've heard some, obviously we're used to extreme rhetoric from Trump, but just before recording, I believe we had reports of Trump speaking about protesters as animals and a foreign enemy. And then on Tuesday, U.S. time, the Marines were called in. So can you sort of contextualize this for us? How extreme is this? And how has Trump justified this?
Well, the use of extreme language from Trump is not new or surprising, but it is inflammatory when you are talking about deploying forces, deploying a National Guard, and then the US military. To call them animals, to dehumanize them, and to delegitimize them. So, for example, both Trump and J.D. Vance, his vice president, in the first wave of protests, described them as insurrectionists. So J.D. Vance defined it for us. He said, a lot of these people are foreign nationals. They're defying American law, and they're marching under a foreign flag. Now, it's true that some of the protests, as you would have seen, the protesters are flying a Mexican flag. My view, that's very unwise because it does look like you are advancing the interests of a foreign state rather than America. Still, that's what they're doing, and that allowed J.D. Vance to ramp up the definition or to maybe to define the act of insurrection to suit the circumstances that he wanted. And Trump, on the same day, said they were insurrectionists. So they're saying that it is a foreign force trying to bring down the US government. Now, on day one, when there were just hundreds of protesters and a very few isolated incidents of violence, that's a big call. By day three, by day four, when you had tens of thousands of people, multiple acts of violence, and the local police chief who had said earlier, McDonnell had said earlier, that the violence was minimal, then said the violence had become quite disgusting. So it did escalate very quickly, but to call it an insurrection from day one was a very deliberate overstatement of the facts and providing the federal government with a pretext to get more aggressive with the deployment of force.
And so can you sort of contextualize this for us? Because you've written, Donald Trump has form in this regard, right? He's been spoiling for a fight, as you've put it, for years. So tell me about, I guess, his previous threats to justify the military to shoot civilians and how this is different, if it is.
Well, the broad impulse is the same. People that he calls leftist lunatics, he's always thought should be repressed with force. You'll remember during the Black Lives Matter protests 2020, when we know from multiple sources, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs himself, Mark Milley, Trump suggested that he shoot protesters, that he deploy the military into the streets to, quote, can't you just shoot them in the legs? And when Trump told Mark Milley that there was an insurrection going on, we have from an American journalist who's published a book, Michael Bender, we have an anecdote where Trump says this is an insurrection, and General Milley points to a portrait of Abraham Lincoln and says, this guy had an insurrection. What we have is a protest. So Trump has been keen to use force, including lethal military force, against, quote, leftist lunatic protesters, specifically what he is calling foreign terrorists.
I mean, this sounds really scary, calling your own people foreign enemies and bringing in the Marines to, potentially, I guess, shoot on them. And of course, we've seen reports of journalists hit by rubber bullets, perhaps other people as well. Is there a precedent for this? I mean, have we seen American presidents before now employ either the military or the National Guard? Obviously, both have been employed in this particular instance. Have we seen this before?
Yes, there are a fair few incidents in US history. To deploy the National Guard against the wishes of the state governor, which is what he's done in California, the last precedent was 60 years ago, 1965, when Johnson brought in the National Guard into Alabama to enforce desegregation laws, and to protect protesters, black protesters. So that was the federal government acting to protect minority rights from discrimination and violence. This is the president going over the head of the state governor to deploy National Guard to act against minority rights. There've also been uses of the military against the Rodney King riots, so-called. George W. Bush brought in the active duty military, but again, on that occasion, that had the concurrence of the state governor. This is an occasion where there is no concurrence, and in fact, Gavin Newsom has formally requested that both the National Guard and the Marines be withdrawn.
I have to ask you, has this actually become a war on American soil? Because, you've pointed out in your latest column that this word war, this is how the Washington Post put it the other day. So is that where we are?
It was the Wall Street Journal editorial that labelled this the beginning of the deportation wars. And it's true that Trump has promised a huge program of deportations. These are the tactics he's choosing to use, the use of force. We have some of the elements there of a war. We don't have wanton use of lethal force. Now, could this escalate? Well, obviously that's everybody's concern. We hope not, but already Trump has been so keen, so anxious, so active to employ units that only exist in the case of the Marines. They only exist in order to prevent, to kill, to destroy foreign states and their forces. So he's been so keen to employ these, and with his history of asking the military to shoot protesters, American citizens on American streets, the concern is that this is where he's heading, and I think the whole world hopes that he doesn't, with the possible exception of leaders in some enemy states who enjoy seeing chaos on the streets, who enjoy seeing this sort of political confrontation, and who can take advantage of America's distraction to pursue their own agendas. And we're talking specifically here about Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping.
Well, this brings me to my next question, really, because you've written that these confrontations that we've been seeing on the streets in LA, they are, and I'm going to quote here, likely the opening scenes of a new phase in U.S. history. That's obviously a very big call. So walk me through this. How so?
Well, the big flag here, I think, was the text of the executive order that Trump signed, under which authority he has sent the National Guard troops and the Marines into Los Angeles. And now, the striking fact about this executive order is that there's no mention of San Francisco or Los Angeles or California or any location or any particular time frame. This is a generic order to authorize the use of National Guard and active duty military, whether the state governor agrees or not. So he's setting this up as a general, open-ended national authority to allow himself to deploy National Guard, to deploy active duty military anywhere across the US at any time. The only time limit on it in his order says that it's at the discretion of the Defense Secretary, who of course works for Trump. So that's why I think this is a threshold, because it opens up now, has claimed a permanent standing new authority to do this sort of thing over and above the wishes of state governors and city mayors.
Where does this take us to, though? Because, as a layperson and listening to this, you think, well, surely down that road authoritarianism lies. And I know we've discussed this before, but is this a tipping point?
Well, Trump, we know, doesn't respect the Constitution. He claimed that he'd won an election where he clearly had not. He was asked just last month, is it your job to uphold the US Constitution? And his answer was, I don't know. He's not concerned with the fundamentals of the rule of law. He's not concerned with the rights of citizens unless they support him and vote for him. So this plus other measures that he's undertaken, past and present. I see today in the Washington Post there's a story that Trump is about to send thousands of immigrants or just travelers who are in the US from a wide range of countries but don't have visas, countries including Britain, France, Germany, Poland. These are NATO allies, but sending thousands of them to Guantanamo Bay.
And I believe without even informing those countries, correct?
According to the Washington Post, they quote officials unnamed saying that they're not inclined to tell the host governments or the native governments of these citizens that they're being sent to Guantanamo Bay. Now, Guantanamo was set up, for terrorists and extreme hard cases. These are, many of them are visa overstayers from friendly countries. So you put all this together and you do get a sort of reckless disregard for due process, for protocol. We know that he's defied Supreme Court rulings. This is a man who recognises no boundaries and acts according to only one imperative, which is his own will. So this is the definition of authoritarianism. The question is not whether he's an authoritarian. He has all those impulses and some of the behaviours already. The question is whether the institutions designed to contain a dictator in the US will work to hold him back.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you, because I know just before recording, I read that a federal judge in California has set a hearing date for Thursday afternoon on the state's request to restrict the federal government's use of Marines and National Guard troops in the Los Angeles areas, limiting them only to protecting federal property. So when you read that, did you think, "Oh, that's reassuring. This is gonna help," or are you worrying, like I'm sure many listeners are, and I certainly am as well, which is that, the judiciary has already been attacked so severely. Is this going to be, an obstacle for Trump or not?
Well, we have to live in hope. We have to hope that if this ruling does go against the federal government, and it may not, but if it does go against the federal government, that he respects it. We don't have a lot of grounds for hope, but it is a test case. And as the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, has said, this is an experiment.
I mean, one of the questions I had written down for you that I was going to ask you, Peter, maybe we'll end on this, was, and Peter, you'll appreciate this, those listeners haven't heard this nuance from me, but like, what is happening? And the reason I ask that is because I am wondering, because I've certainly been watching this from afar, just absolutely, jaw dropped. And I wonder, how is this going to be processed by the American people? Like, there's been obviously there's been an inundation. There's been a flooding of the zone of just, extreme executive order after extreme executive order. Obviously, such extreme calls from everything to do with, war calls and finance. Do you think American people are just like, okay, well, here's another day. Let's just survive this day? Or do you think there'll be consequences to what this sounds massive?
I think it is. I think it is massive. I think it is the beginning of a new phase. But remember that the week before the election in which Trump was elected last year, there was a CNN poll that found more than, I think it was 60% of Americans recognized that Trump acted like a dictator. And then the following week they elected him anyway. So they know the man, they know his character, they know his behaviours in the past. So that reduces, I think, the shock and outrage factor of him now acting according to everything and every impulse that he's ever displayed. The question is whether they thought he would fully and seriously act on those impulses and urges and total disregard for people's rights. We have to wait and see, but that could and would be one of the elements of resistance or defiance or trying to put some sort of limit on Trump's freedom to act against the rights of US citizens. Because
we didn't even discuss the visuals of all of this. Like, it's one thing, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, okay, that's persuasive, right? People knew this. They thought he was a dictator, or 60% of them did, and then voted him in anyway. And I'm thinking, will it change their minds that they're now seeing military tanks on the streets? I mean, it is something, it's like out of China, the visuals, isn't it?
Well, there's been no massacre yet. The tanks at Tiananmen Square immediately come to mind, and there were somewhere between several hundred and several thousand innocent people butchered on that day. We have to hope this isn't America's Tiananmen Square.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, as always, for your time.
It's a very uncomfortable subject, but always a pleasure to discuss with you, Samantha.